Hi all, D.D. Neal. Once again talking to you about storytelling, writerly things, etc., etc. And if you like my ruminations, do please consider liking and subscribing. I wanted to follow up a little bit on the illusion versus delusion stuff I was talking about earlier. And it was a longer post, but I'm trying to succinctly get to one of the key points that I had, which is because writers make characters, because we create characters, that is we think about motivations. We think about how a character might present themselves, whether they're a good person or a bad person, and we think about what makes somebody a good person or a bad person. Who's a hero, who's a villain, and why. And that level of analysis that we do with regard to characters, and again, this is people, good writers, people for whom they are paying attention to those things versus people who are just using stock characters and archetypes and stereotypes. When you really get behind the curtain on that with regard to a character's motivations, that does, I think, at least speaking only for me, but it does bleed through in our everyday lives with regard to people. So you might hear somebody say something and you're kind of like, well, where'd that come from? Why'd that person say this? Is this what they're really about? And you start to look. And from a writerly perspective, again, those details that are our tendency to draw forth from these things and come up with narratives, it happens all the time. And you run into a situation in the real world where people say, oh, so-and-so is a great person. They're just great. And this is non-writers. They'd be, oh, so-and-so is so great. And as a writer, you might look at that and go, are they? Are they actually great? What are they doing? What are they about? What are they saying? What are their motivations? Why are they behaving this way? These are writerly questions, okay, which can seem very kind of suspicious, but that's a thing that we do because we are used to living in the minds of our characters that we create. And again, from a non-writer perspective, you're like, they're just characters. You just made up these people. They're imaginary people that you're dealing with. But for writers, we live and breathe those illusions, right? And those characters that we create, we think about their motivations. Now, in real life, and those of us who are not delusional, those of us who are mere illusionists, who understand the very clear line between reality and fiction, we think like people aren't real people. People versus characters. People have all sorts of motivations for why they do something. It's not as clear-cut as it might be with a character. The ideal when you're crafting a character is to have a certain consistency with regard to their actions and their thoughts that fit them as a character. A real-life person could make mistakes. They can screw up in things because their lives are their own. Their things that they're doing are their own, and so they don't have the benefit of a writer puppeteering their existence. But in terms of practical benefits and drawbacks, I suppose, to the writerly life, is you can watch people and really assess them from a writerly perspective. And you can really wonder about somebody. And it's funny because people who might vote for somebody who is a liar and a criminal might be like, why is this liar and criminal person why are they lying and being criminal? I never would have imagined that. That capacity for self-deception from a writer perspective is like, well, they telegraphed everything that they did. They foreshadowed everything that they were going to do. And so we're like the least surprised people when somebody shows their true colors or when they turn out to be exactly who they said they were. And everyday people, they get supposedly surprised by that. But from a writer perspective, you're kind of like, no, it's kind of a human relations version of Chekhov's gun. The idea of Chekhov's gun, you show the gun in the first act and it's going to go, you're certain that it's going to go off in like the third act or the fifth act. It's going to show up later. It's there for a reason. Now, in everyday life, things don't necessarily have that clean-cut line of cause and effect. But you know, you put a gangster in charge of a police department, you know what you're gonna get? You're gonna get a criminal police department because, you put the gangster in charge. So, writers, I think, see that more directly than non-writers, because non-writers are busy in the theater of life. They're not observing it, right? They are participants and not spectators. Now, writers are both spectators and participants. We're there, but we're also looking around, and it's kind of like a whodunit. We're the ones who go into the room, and there's all these other people there, and we're kind of going, okay, hero, villain, toady, sidekick, saboteur, etc. Whatever it is, wherever you are. And honestly, I've found in my life, people can be uncomfortable with that writerly scrutiny, and when you're more mature as a writer, you don't reveal that. That you're looking. Now, I've had people react to that like, "Oh my gosh, you see everything," and they get uncomfortable by that, by being scrutinized like that, and we can't help it, because everything, and I said this a number of posts ago, but everything's material. Everything is material to a writer. Good stuff is material. Bad stuff is material. And wondering about somebody's motives for what they're doing, that's a very writerly place to be. Instead of just taking it with stars in your eyes. Oh yeah, this is great. They're so great. They're so wonderful. So it's not that writers can't be scammed, because certainly writers can be, but as illusionists, we live and breathe that way of looking at the world. And because we are so comfortable with character creation, whether they're heroes and villains, what makes a person a hero? What makes him a hero? What makes a person a villain? We have ready answers for that. And I could speak a lot more about that, because I think moral pathways, moral philosophy, awareness of things is part of the writer's skill set, because we do create characters. We create imaginary people in our worlds, in our stories, which means that we have to think just about, and I haven't even talked about fantasy yet, but just like how people talk in fantasy, you have to build a theory of magic. You have to come up with a mechanism within your story, within your world, for how magic works. There's a similar framework, in the sense that it's a framework, not that it's the same as magic, but there's a framework for moral action. What do you consider moral? What's immoral? And that depends on the writer, the individuality of the writer, and what the story that they're trying to write. But we think in terms of moral frameworks. What saying one thing, doing another, right? That's kind of the root of, in my opinion, a very clear aspect of what can be evil. The idea of saying X and doing Y. And a lot of people have their rationalizations for why they might do that. But from a writer perspective, and it does bleed through from fiction into the real world, is understanding someone's motives and motivations based on empirical observation, what you're seeing and how people are behaving or misbehaving. So I'll talk more about that in the future, because there is a lot to be said about that. But again, if you're writing something meaningful, you really are thinking in terms of those moral frameworks of the story you're trying to tell, the themes, what you want to get across to the reader, what you want them to come away with. And it does affect how we live and how we see the world around us and the people within it.